We are now recording, so we'll be serious. Okay, Charlotte, we're gonna talk about you, Field of Vision, the vast variety of films that you're involved in. This is primarily for young people who probably look up the ladder of a career in the film industry and are scared senseless and have absolutely no access to people like yourself. So it'd be quite exciting for them just to listen to your opinions. Hence, I will be quiet as much as I can be. I just wanted to start off by saying, obviously, I first met you at Hot Docs in Toronto. The first time I had any interaction with you was actually with an email saying, Simon, can I please see your short film, Orbis? And I remember being very excited and nervous at the same time, and luckily ended up in Toronto. And I think I met you in a strange pub, which was one of the events you'd organised. So, and I remember coming away from that festival thinking, wow, I had so much fun here. It was very film maker orientated, lots of events, and I think a lot of filmmakers get very excited about festivals because it's their one chance to meet other directors. It's quite a lonely business being a filmmaker often. So I just wanted to ask you a bit about that first. I know you still do program for CPH Docs, and just talk a bit about your history and what it takes to get the attention of top programmers like yourself for young filmmakers.
Yeah, I mean, I think the hardest thing for a lot of young people is there is no set path, right? I don't know anyone who did the same thing as me, and I don't know anyone who did the same thing. So I think that's always like this huge kind of feeling for young people of like, well, if there's no playbook, how do I even think of doing this? So I kind of started, my first programming job was for the Frontline Club in London. And I had never really programmed before, but I had done a master's in documentary, and I had worked at Storyville, which I started there as an intern. And I just kind of had the documentary bug at that point. And when I started, this was in London, there were very few people showing feature-length documentaries. So that was kind of my feeling with Frontline. It was a really exciting challenge because most of the audience were journalists or filmmakers themselves. And what does it mean to show people who do the work? And it was really fun. And it kind of made me realize how fun it is to put a film on a screen and watch people watch it and enjoy it. Like, that feeling is fantastic. It's one of my favorite things to do. And so from there, I ended up at Hot Docs, and I think the reason that they gave me the job was because I had a varied background. It wasn't that I had been this kind of career programmer and I'd worked in millions of different places. It was that I had worked at the BBC and that I had worked in different ways. And that was kind of what they were looking for, was somebody who actually understood the industry and understood the different parts of festivals. And for me, I kind of came out of nowhere. I'm not from a wealthy background. And so I've always come at things, I guess, in a way of like, none of it feels, I don't take anything for granted because it doesn't feel given. All of this still feels insane to me that I get to do this for a living. Like, I still, I mention this all the time. Like, if I talk to my 16-year-old self that I'd even ever met somebody who directed a film, it would have blown my tiny mind. So the fact that I know filmmakers now still isn't lost on me, So for me, when I went to Hot Docs, I was pretty young and I was still relatively new to all this. And I really didn't understand this idea of like the big gatekeepers. Like, to me, that felt, the idea of being one felt so uncomfortable to me. Because I was like, I barely know anything, I'm a child. So I kind of really looked at it of like, how can I come at this in a way that kind of shakes up what that means? Because it just seemed to be this imbalance between filmmakers and programmers that I really felt really uncomfortable about. So we really looked at like what it meant to be a programmer, what it meant to do this, and like how could we actually be more involved. So that was why, actually the experience of the festival was really important to us, because I called every filmmaker I knew and said, like, tell me your horror stories about film festivals. And most of them were, I would show up on my own. I didn't know anyone. I didn't meet anyone for the festival. Like, walking into parties is the most intimidating thing on earth. And so I was like, okay, well, this is a barrier we have to, so the programmers at Hot Docs, and, they were doing this before my time too. We just kind of ramped it up, knew that like in parties, their job was to go and introduce filmmakers to each other. And I used to always say, like, my job was to be the last man standing of every night of the festival, which, depending on what filmmakers want to do, can be a very late night. But to make sure, and I always stayed in the festival with the filmmakers rather than going to like anything invite only or So it was really fun. You know, it was nice for filmmakers to feel like they had programmers around them that were in it with them for the whole festival. You know, we have drinks with the filmmakers during their film. They're not kind of, there's no like come back at the Q&A. And, you know, I would also, one of the things I really wanted to do was I wrote everybody who had a film in the festival a handwritten thank you card, because I really wanted to change that dynamic of you feeling like, you know, you're somehow honored that we have selected your film into like, we are so grateful you're letting us show your work, because I wanted Hot Docs to have more of that feeling to it, because without anybody's films, we have no festival. So, and then, you know, from then on going into Field of Vision, it's, you know, my favorite thing is working with filmmakers. Filmmakers are the best people on earth. And filmmakers dictate what I do all the time. You know, if ever I'm stuck on anything in terms of what we're doing at Field of Vision or how we did it at Hot Docs, like I ask filmmakers because they know better than anyone else, because they experience it. So, you know, one of the things we did towards the last few years of Hot Docs was anyone who had a world premiere, I would have a call with them and say, you know, what are your expectations? Because what you didn't want is people to have too high expectations you couldn't meet. And also if some people have really low expectations that we can do better at. And so it was really nice to talk to all the world premiering filmmakers to just get a sense of what they were looking for and how we could meet that. So yeah, I guess my whole career has been defined by what filmmakers largely advise me to do or like tell me not to do. And so, you know, that's any success I've had is down to them for sure.
You touched on it a bit there, but let's be specific. How do we get your attention? You know, how does a young person, he's looking at that bar full of filmmakers, he wants to be there, he wants to be hanging out with Charlotte, or she wants to be there. Next year I'm going to apply, I'm going to send them my film, I'm going to get in. How do I get your attention?
I think it's a number of things. I mean, the one thing, I'm always surprised if I meet filmmakers who don't watch other films. Like that's always a bit like, huh, okay, you want to do this for a living, but you don't want to watch what's going on, because over time you see that there are trends, there are things that shift, the ways of making films shift there, you know, and I'm not in any way saying anyone should follow them. If anything, subvert those things, because in some ways that makes you stand out. But I do think having an awareness of what has been programmed where can be really helpful, because you know, I've produced films, so I have, you know, and I've had a sense of like, okay, I think that festival will take it based on knowing what they normally take or what they're interested in, or just their audience, because it's not, one of the biggest kind of myths about programmers is it's all down to our taste. Like actually, if you're a bad programmer, it's down to your taste. It shouldn't be your taste, you know, like, because also again, like we're only one person. If you're a good programmer, you are thinking about audience. You're thinking about not only the audience you have, but also the ways you want to challenge your own audience, because we build up trust with our audience to be able to challenge them. And you're also thinking about the filmmaker. You're thinking, you know, is this someone who really needs this space? Are we a festival that can really help them in this film? Like that is a huge, for me, consideration. You're also thinking, you know, Hot Docs, we'd have, say, 50 different things we'd be thinking of in making the program. Like where are the films from? What stage are the filmmakers at? You know, who's behind the camera? What's the film about? Who's in front of the camera? Like all of those things were considerations you put into a program. So I think in terms of trying to get somebody's attention, I mean, making the film is the first hurdle, and that's what filmmakers should absolutely concentrate on, because that is the big thing. But also just having a sense of what your film is and like where it sits in the universe and like who might really respond to it. And I really wanted to work more with filmmakers in like getting their films made. You know, I think you're in a nice position at a festival where you kind of see people who are nearly done, and but I wanted to really kind of get in the weeds with filmmakers around funding, around how to, you know, get their films made. So when Laura approached me to do Field of Vision, it seemed like a kind of perfect combination of the two. It was a very curated place. And also it was building something. You know, I hadn't ever built anything before. I'd gone into kind of long-standing organizations. So to me, that was really exciting. And also getting the chance to kind of craft an organization, a new film organization from the ground up of what that could be, was really exciting to me. So those were the real draws. And of course, working with Laura, you know, it was a big draw. And so, yeah, it's been amazing just being able to kind of craft an organization, you know, decide what that means and what it looks like. And I think especially considering, you know, pretty much everyone who's worked with us like makes films in their own right in some way or works with films, it like gave us a different perspective on what a film organization could be like and how it could work with filmmakers. So those are the kind of real draws for me.
So I remember reading about it at the time and thinking, oh, this sounds cool. And you guys described yourself as a visual journalism unit. And I was thinking, and immediately was like, shit, I'm a filmmaker and I don't know what they're talking about. So Can you just explain a bit about the sort of ethos behind the company and what you hope to do from the get-go and how you're different from everyone else?
Totally, and I think you've hit on a problem, and also it was slightly intentional all the way through of being kind of vague, right? So I think filmmakers, we hear this a lot of not necessarily knowing what we're doing all the time, and part of that was very intentional. It really was of we wanted to not be definable. We didn't want it to be like, oh, you're just another X. And we are actually in the process of really trying to like redefine ourselves for filmmakers because I always want us to have this freedom because we can change any part of field of vision whenever we want. And I love that. So if something doesn't work, we can just stop doing it, we can change it. And that was a really key part for me, to not be kind of set in any systems that didn't work. But at the same time, the clarity is needed for filmmakers. So that's a bigger thing. But what we decided to do in the beginning was this idea that we wanted to bring filmmakers and artist perspectives into the news cycle through online shorts. Like that's the kind of basics of kind of what we were doing. And it was really interesting. We had such high hopes. Like in the beginning, we wanted to do 40 to 50 shorts a year, which was impossible. And we realized that very, very quickly. And also, when you're working with filmmakers who don't always make shorts, because a lot of our filmmakers don't always make shorts, filmmakers, again, the most amazing people on earth, and they really said to us, look, we don't like this kind of like parachuting in and doing these really quick things. Like we like to know the community we're making the films about. We want to be from there, which is really important to us. And we don't, we want to take our time a little bit more. So that was, and again, like we respond to filmmakers. So that was something that we were like, okay, we have to change this idea of this kind of, we're not making news videos here, we're making short films online. So we kind of adapted that. I mean, some filmmakers can make things really, really fast, but it shouldn't always be the case, right? It shouldn't be it should be whatever the story needs time-wise. So that was kind of how we went into it. And for me, certainly, being the kind of the one non-American on the team, it was really important that field of vision was international. And so, our remit very much was like, it has to be stories from around the world. We want the stories to be told by people who really are embedded in that story, and really understand the nuances and the nuances of place. So yeah, we started doing shorts, and for the first few years we only did shorts, and then over time we started doing features, and again, that was because filmmakers asked us to. So we had different filmmakers come to us and say, hey, you're supporting this very artistic work. There isn't that much support for this kind of work or work that's taking risks creatively. We need you to start funding features. So we were like, okay. And so that kind of became part of our strategy too. So now we do both. And we work with them in completely different ways, but we can fund, any length of project, which I love as well.
So initially when you kicked it off, obviously like the big headline is the Laura Poitras setting up in New York. And, I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be like lots of little Citizen 4 documentaries coming out, and fairly early on, you started to broaden into very different genres of documentary, to the point now where it would almost be impossible to say what your favorite field of vision genre is. Can you just talk a bit about documentary genres and what you're interested in and where your focus, if anywhere, lies?
Yeah, I mean, with the shorts, the way I kind of look at it is it's not easy to do it. I'll say that out of the gate. We want something that's both timely and timeless. And we're looking for a take on a story that's in the news cycle, but told from a perspective we haven't seen before. That's really kind of the crux of what we're looking for in the shorts. So, an example that I always give is Josh Begley, who is our artist in residence. And he made a film about the US border wall right around the time where that was very much in the news, but made it through using Google Images to really show the entire border and how it's impossible to build a wall. So really we're looking at, I haven't seen this story told this way, because, we're all in it, especially right now, where we're bombarded by news. I think it's really overwhelming. And a lot of the time we have to check out for, like just sanity reasons. So we were kind of thinking like, well, how do we get a story that's important told in a way that's like really compelling, that people think like, oh, this is new. Like I haven't considered it that way before. I haven't seen it told in that way. And so that's really where the shorts come in. So I think, when people kind of pitch us things that may not be what we kind of are looking for, that's really what it comes down to, is that kind of approach to the story rather than the story itself.
bloody enormous success online, that film. I mean, like nothing I've ever seen. Can you just perhaps paint the picture of what happened to that film?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was so funny because it's Josh's first ever film as well. So that was like, and you know, we love working with first time filmmakers. So it's Josh's first film. His background is he's a data artist. So he kind of used his data to tell stories, but hadn't done it in film form. And we were very conscious that we were about to put this out into the news cycle where it was very much something people were talking about. But one thing we also did, and we do think about this with all of our films, is that we made two different versions. So we made a Spanish language one too. And we really thought about, like, I mean, this is part of the joy of putting things out online, is that the audience is potentially enormous because it's everyone. But a lot of the time, I think a lot of, especially Western companies, just focus on English language. They focus on a US audience, certainly. And like, we don't do that. We really think about, you know, this is going to a global audience and how do we position it that way? So, you know, we really kind of pushed out to different places. We have subtitles on it. We really thought about that. And I think that's partly, why I mean, it's Josh's work too. I mean, Josh has never, you know, Josh's work just somehow catches people in that way. And I think it is really because, again, it's that, you know, it's something you haven't seen. There's no way you've seen anything in the way that Josh tells it. You know, his second film with us, Concussion Protocol, looked at concussions in the NFL and was told in a way that, like, that footage had never been put together like that. So I think, you know, we've learned over time that if something is told in that way, it really does grab people's attention. And your film, Simon, is a perfect example of it as well. You know, it really is. Because it goes beyond what you imagine the story would be or how it's been told before. And actually, you know, audiences want things that really grab them in that way.
So, I remember talking to you about online, and I was really scared about online, but I looked at Josh's viewing figures online and I was just like, I mean, how many millions of views did he get?
I can't even remember. It's a lot. I mean, it really is a lot.
I'll put the number up on screen. But it was.
I remember you emailing me about that, and I thought, oh my god, like I don't know if we can match your expectations. But to be honest, I mean, like your film's done incredibly well. So
yeah. Josh is twice done incredible work with Concussion Protocol and with the Wall film. Yeah. I want, just as we're in this space, I do want to ask you about the online and the model for field of vision, because I remember premiering our film at IDFA. I'm so excited. I've just had a filming competition at IDFA, something I've always wanted to do in my life, like tick box ticked. And then next conversation with you guys is, right, we're going to put it online in January. And I'm thinking, why? No, I've only just been to my first festival. No film will ever take this film again. I'll never get to travel with it. And you obviously knew a lot more than I did at that stage. Can you talk a bit about, firstly, the model, the field of vision model, festivals online, and then perhaps why? Yeah, carry on.
I was going to say, like, when I think about how many festivals your film has played, it's something like, it's well over 50, I think, at this point, right? So, you know, this was something we didn't know in the beginning. Like, our goal was like, we're going to do these first fast turnaround shorts, we're going to go straight online. And then, you know, as we were talking to the filmmakers, they were like, but we want to play festivals and we want to do these things. So we were like, okay, well, we have to adapt to that and we have to see. And, you know, we launched Field of Vision at the New York Film Festival, I guess, in the September of 2015. And so obviously, like, we were heading into like Sundance time. So we're like, you know, will they take the films? Because, you know, we all know premiere status is a real thing, right? So of those films, I think at least 2, if not 3, made it into Sundance that year. And so we were like, oh, okay, you know, and they were all online. They had already been online. And we talked to the shorts programmers there, and they were like, yeah, you know, we don't really adhere to this. Like, you know, the short scenario is a different world. And we found that as time went on, more festivals kind of got on board with that. But shorts programmers are in a different kind of league because they're very meshed in the shorts world. So they really talk to each other. They're less competitive. They really believe in like the platform they have for shorts for the festival. So they just don't kind of adhere to the same. I mean, you still have to be strategic, but they don't adhere to the same kind of level of restriction when it comes to online. So we do definitely think about that. We have to think about academy qualifying. We have to think about all those things and what that means. But we really strategize out the films in that way. And we really think about what the filmmakers want as well. And also, you know, we handle festival submissions and we do awards. So we try and take off all that stuff off filmmakers' plates. Because our model really is that, you know, we fully fund the shorts. And so we kind of take the shorts on board as our films, and so take on the responsibilities that come with that too, to try and, you know, make filmmakers' experience better in that way.
Can we talk, what would you say the end goal was for you with a short? I mean, what is the sort of ideal thing for you to do with it, to happen to the short? What when you sit down and you look at a project, what's the plan? Is there one in particular, or is it a wide scope?
It's a wide scope, but I think for me, I don't know, it's an interesting question, because when we walked into the online space, I realized, like, I did a lot of research about, you know, because everyone will tell you things. Everyone will say, oh, they can't be long. Or they, you know, back in the day when it was kind of the big square things you'd see on Facebook with text all over them, like, they have to be able to be watched without sound, is what we were told a lot of the time. You know, like, it needs to fit into like the Facebook scroll. And we were like, oh God, that sounds awful. And then, you know, we were told all these things. And I consistently did research, and there is a lot of good research out there actually that really kind of just disagreed with all of this. And I think because I've been obsessed with audiences since I've been working, I just didn't believe this. You know, I've seen audiences get captured by shorts. I've seen, you know, and so we ignored a lot of that advice. We ignored this idea that you have to put a lot of money behind Facebook to get views. Which actually has been proven, as we've seen with a lot of the reporting showing that all those views weren't necessarily real. And really, we focused on real viewership. So, and Vimeo is where we get that, because you can't, you know, you can't game Vimeo. You can't put tons of money behind things. You can't, you know, Vimeo is very real in terms of what an audience looks like. So for me, success is like actually people watching the films and hopefully talking about them. You know, my dream scenario is we put a film out and like you can feel people on Twitter talking about it. You can see people sharing it. The comments come through. You know, I get all the comments for our platforms to my email, which everyone on my team thinks is, you know, too much. But I love seeing what people are saying about the films, and it gives like a real sense of how people are responding to them. So that for me, it's like, it's real viewership. I want people to watch the films. Yeah, it's the kind of the stats of it all and all those kinds of things are less important to me, to be honest.
It's something I get asked a lot now, is because we've had 40,000 views on Vimeo and 160,000 views on YouTube, people think I'm an expert on online. And I haven't got a clue. I always say, no, you really do need to speak to these people in New York. But so what do you recommend or say for young filmmakers desperate to find an audience online without, you know, a big media production company behind them? Can they do that? Is it possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends what you want to do. You know, if you've gotten to a point where you're going to put the film out yourself, and you're kind of okay with that, you know, you're just going to upload it to your channel, then I would reach out to different publications and just say like, hey, would you be interested in writing about this? Or, you know, because that was one thing. I mean, we're changing strategy on this a little bit, but it might be helpful, because when we started, you know, we were like, we're a new video platform. And to be honest, we had no audience. So it was kind of, you know, we really felt like in some ways we were letting the filmmakers down by just kind of putting the films out and hoping for the best. Well, certainly the film world were watching us, but like beyond that wider public. So we started doing this thing which we call publishing partners, in which we would essentially give the film for free to another outlet for them to promote for us. And it was great, you know, and then it meant that we could tailor each film to a different outlet depending on what the film was about. And kind of now we have a more robust audience ourselves. We're kind of reimagining what that looks like, because there is a catch-22 there of other video departments not paying for things properly, you know, so it doesn't create necessarily a healthy ecosystem. So we're trying to interrogate that a little bit, because we, you know, so and this is something we do also think about all the way through in our mission, is like where we sit in the industry and how we can improve it for filmmakers. So that's something we're thinking about all the time. So we're re-looking at what a publishing partner might be and how we partner with people. But I would say to filmmakers, that's a good way, because you essentially have a free film for them to give to their viewers. And in many ways, I mean, like with your film, we did The Atlantic, right? I think was your partner, who, like, sadly, they've just closed them down. And God, they were such an incredible partnership. I mean, Emily, who ran that team, is amazing. But yeah, they were very, very good. They asked so little from us. They really supported the films. And that's kind of what we're looking for. So yeah, I would say reach out to places that you think have an audience that would really support your film and say, hey, would you be interested in doing something about this? And there are a lot of people looking for that kind of thing, and it can really, really boost the film. It really can.
Okay. I've asked a few separate filmmakers to ask questions to you, and one of them sort of goes into that space. She said, Caitlin, who asked, what's the business model nowadays for shorts? Is it ultimately digital ads that pay for production costs in the field of vision model? And does that change production budgets and the content agenda?
Ooh, okay. It's a really difficult question because everyone kind of does it differently. And the shorts field changes all the time. I mean, one of the things that I think people don't see is actually like the awards part of the shorts thing. And I think obviously that's a difficult thing for filmmakers to get their heads around. And also you shouldn't aim for that. Like I would never suggest, but people do, right? And I do think there are a lot of organizations, especially at the big platforms, who see the short doc Oscar as like a kind of not easier one to win, but perhaps like a less kind of costly one to try and win.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't recommend anyone going down that road. We've done it twice. It's a huge amount of work and it costs so much money. And I hate that it costs so much money. But that there is like a weird market for kind of awards type shorts that is actually quite a lot of money. So if you feel like you have a film that actually kind of fits in that realm, there is a big market out there, but that's a very small type of short that kind of is in that category. And then you kind of have most of the difficulty, I think, for shorts filmmakers really is that most funding is tied to platforms. And because most platforms are online, they want the kind of exclusive rights. And if they can't afford to pay what the short costs to make, you're at a loss already. And that's always the decision I think shorts filmmakers are trying to grapple with is like, is that financial loss worth it for what this platform can do with my film? And that's really tough. And I think that's something we're kind of trying to push back against. Like we have to have a more sustainable and robust shorts market because they do really well, you know, and our colleagues at The Intercept are moving into doing longer shorts because they've seen, you know, with us that they've done really well. So they're actually really thinking about that now. And I love that. So I think people are largely seeing there is definitely an audience for this kind of film, but it's trying to get the budgets behind them because once you kind of sign on with a platform, it's really hard to fundraise. I mean, we've had some people reach out to us recently trying to do co-productions on shorts and it's near impossible because so much of the money is tied to platforms. So you can't say do, you know, The Guardian and the New York Times because they want to be the one, you know, and fair enough, like they want to be the one to put it out. That's what they're doing. But that is really hard. So I hope there's going to be more kind of grant-based funding for shorts, or I don't know. That's what's tough. This is why we're kind of really like obsessive about trying to pay what they cost to make. But then on the flip side, also because people, you know, very savvy filmmakers do see awards potential for some of their shorts, we actually are starting to get outpriced on some of those. Like we just can't afford to pay what some of those high-end shorts are costing. But you know, like we've sold a short to Netflix. You know, they are looking for stuff. You know, I'm trying to think who funded different shorts, like National Geographic are looking for shorts. Like it is starting to become a much more healthy market. I don't think we're quite where I would love it to be or where filmmakers would love it to be, but I do think it's coming. So it's certainly better than when we started.
I did notice when you sold the short to Netflix, I won't say what it is, but they seem to take your name and not your name, but the production company off it. Is that Netflix?
Yeah, I mean, it's a Netflix original, so that's part of the original thing with Netflix, right? It's like it has to be an original, and it's an interesting thing. I mean, for us, it was worth it for how much they paid for it and the positioning they gave it and what that did for the filmmaker. And these are always the choices we're making. This is, you know, it is part of the problem. People are super competitive. That one was like a really healthy scenario. But a lot of platforms do want to pull things off when it comes to crediting, and it's a challenge we have constantly. You know, when we're kind of funding the films to get made and then we try and kind of put them out there is a lot of the times the first thing people want to take off is the crediting, which is really difficult.
Okay. Jessie, who's studying actually at Stanford, she's studying at documentary at Stanford at the moment, South African filmmaker. She asks, should she now be making car commercials? She says the production of short films has significantly been disrupted by COVID-19 over the past few months. Even when a vaccine has been found, it seems that the effects of the pandemic will have long-lasting effects on the way we make and distribute short documentaries. What are Charlotte's thoughts on this and the feasibility surrounding film funding and distribution or documentary filmmakers in this current climate?
I mean, if you can get good money making a car commercial, there's no harm in it, because to me, the commercials route isn't necessarily bad, because actually the budgets for those are pretty big and they're short term. It's not like you're going on to some long-term thing that would stop you being able to do your work. And I know a lot of filmmakers who have made like really good careers out of kind of doing both their own creative work and commercial based work. like a lot of big name filmmakers, that's how they live, because it gives them the freedom to then also make really creative work they want to make rather than having to chase funding all the time. So I don't knock the idea of doing commercial work at all. I actually think it can be very smart. It's that balance you're trying to do of like, is it taking you away too much from what you want to do? Like that's always the challenge, because I do know filmmakers who kind of went down the commercials route and got sucked into it and can't get their way back out. So like trying to balance it is really the key. I do think, you know, the one thing for me that feels interesting about the short space during COVID is that it is largely an online space, you know, and so therefore that hasn't necessarily been affected in a huge way. I don't know, like it all feel, when you look at like largely recessions, like the entertainment industry, I hate calling it that, but like hasn't been hit as hard as other industries, you know. And I do think for filmmakers, it was really tough in the beginning of the pandemic because a lot of film organizations like had to like figure out their own productions they had in place. It like took a while. But I do know that people like actively trying to commission right now. You know, right now they have an audience of people who are desperately trying to watch stuff. So I don't know of like all the places I know that fund shorts, I don't think they've stopped. So, you know, we certainly haven't stopped. We also are aware that there is like in some ways a more engaged audience than there has been because people are at home. So I'm not too, I mean, really it's always for me, the big challenge is the long-term success of these organizations, especially nonprofit organizations, of like, can they keep their head above water? And partly the bigger problem, I suppose, is so much of our, like the doc space is funded by philanthropic money, right? And a lot of philanthropy has moved from funding the kind of work we do into relief funding. And that's the real challenge of our industry right now. And you can understand it, but it also is really tough for us. So it's really like, are we going to lose a lot of that philanthropic money? And in that sense, will we lose a lot of the organizations we've come to rely on to fund work? That's my real worry. And we just won't know yet because we don't know how long this is going to go on for.
I suppose the big headline was Tribeca, the Tribeca Institute, saying it was closing its doors, and you guys seem to step in a bit there and take in one of their flagship funding models. Can you talk a bit about that and what it means?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they have their own funding. So they have funding from MacArthur, who has been supporting them for a really long time. So they kind of came to us and said, you know, the organization is shutting down, but we have our own funding. I mean, obviously, like you always have to keep applying for funding and things, but they kind of were in a position where it really felt unfair they would go, considering they had kind of fundraised themselves. And for me, it just felt like such a great chance to be able to try and save an organization that really was great for short filmmakers, because, you know, we can't afford to lose any support for short filmmakers. And I love that If Then is really dedicated to kind of mentorship and help and support, and it is less platform driven. I mean, like I was saying before, there are so few places that help fund films that aren't platform specific. So it just felt like a win-win for us, for them. It meant we would have this kind of arm of Field of Vision that really was doing more filmmaker development and support, which is something I always want to do, and, you know, wish we did more of. So it just made sense to bring them in. We also have completely shared values in advocating for filmmakers, trying to improve the field. So yeah, it just felt like a really wonderful thing to be able to do. And Chloe and Caitlin, who do If Then, are unreal. So it's, you know, it's as much a win for us as it is for them, I think.
And specifically, what do you think they'll be looking for over the coming sort of months and years when they work with you? Is there an agenda already, or is it sort of evolving?
Well, one thing they're really great at is they do a lot of regional support. So it's, you know, in the US and increasingly more so internationally. And their goal is to try and create events, or at least like a kind of way in for filmmakers who might not be close to big festivals or close to big events. And that's something I really love about them, because one thing we really noticed when the pandemic started, we started doing this thing called office hours, which is essentially we just wanted to give our time to filmmakers, and have a place where they could come and talk to people in the industry and, like, you know, share information or just chat, really. And it's been really amazing. And one of the things that was the most striking is it wasn't, you know, there were people affected by COVID that jumped onto those meetings, but really it was a lot of people who live in a place where they don't have access to events and festivals and forums, and really had, you know, wanted to talk to someone in the industry and just get career advice. And I mean, that was amazing. And I think, you know, we will try and carry on with office hours, you know, should the pandemic ever end, in some way for that reason, of so that there is access for filmmakers who don't live in areas close to events, to have access to the industry. And I think if then really slots into our desire to want to do that more. So I think, I mean, I would say to filmmakers, just keep an eye on what they're doing, because they're building different initiatives in different places, for different filmmakers in different regions. So that's kind of where they land, is really thinking region specific, which I think is great.
Final funding question. You know, you're a young filmmaker looking at all of these different things online. It's absolutely terrifying. What general advice would you give to people in that space right now?
I would say, one, don't be terrified. And two, because there's no harm, right? There's no harm, you know, and if you decide not to do it, other people are going to do it anyway. So there's no harm in trying. And the one thing I was actually most surprised about, because when we did do these kind of mentorship calls, I took all the Europeans because it made sense, because I'm in the UK right now, time zone wise. And I was so, and it was amazing to like reconnect, especially with British filmmakers. But I was really surprised about how non-US filmmakers don't apply for US money. I was really, really surprised by that, because the US have more of this kind of robust grant-based system. And grant money, you don't have to pay back. It's like, you know, it's the best kind of money to fund your film. But so many filmmakers hadn't even kind of explored, because I think, you know, and I saw this when we launched Field of Vision, we did an event at CPH Docs, and a lot of filmmakers kept saying, like, is this applicable to us? And I was like, we've just shown you like 5 international films, but it's so ingrained, I think, and I understand it, that US funding or US organizations don't support international filmmakers. And it's just not true. Yes, it's not at the ratio we'd all want, but they do. And I would say, like, that would be my biggest thing, is to apply for, think about beyond your country. Because, you know, I hear a lot of British filmmakers who are just trying to go within the British system. And I'm like, why haven't you applied for IDA funding? Why haven't you applied for Sundance funding? So that would be my big thing. And the one, especially if people are working on features, but it's also a good exercise for shorts filmmakers too, is the IDA have done this incredible thing where, you know, a few years ago, if you were applying for funding, everyone had different requirements. You would spend forever trying to meet word counts of different places. And they created this thing called the Common Application, which is essentially you complete a proposal once, and then all these different funders adhere to the same requirements. So you don't have to make multiple proposals. And that is a great exercise to do as a filmmaker, of like how to talk about your film, how to pitch your film. And once you've done that, you know, I've produced films, like, and once you've done that thing, it's actually really easy to kind of use the language for different funders. So I would check that out. Yeah, on the IDA website, they just have like a kind of PDF that explains the Common Application. But research international funding. You'd be surprised that it, you know, there is funding out there for no matter what country you're from.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about a few separate Field of Vision films, because I think that we can then demonstrate how broad these approaches are. First of all, I think a really famous Field of Vision film is Night in the Garden, which was Oscar nominated the year before last. Purely archive, millions of views online, and an Oscar nom, and tons and tons of festivals. I mean, it must be considered a massive success. How did it come to you? Why did you buy into it? Why do you think it's been so successful?
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Americans, American patriots, I'm sure I do not come before you tonight as a complete stranger. You all have heard of me through the Jewish-controlled press as a creature with horns, a cloven hoof, and a long tail. We, with American ideals, demand that our government shall be returned to the American people who founded it. If you ask.
Yeah, I mean, that one, I mean, Marshall's an incredible filmmaker, like, of course. And I remember actually when that footage kind of came through, I was actually back here in the UK, and it was right around Charlottesville. So that was, you know, it was really on everyone's mind about, you know, this horrific rise of like the far right in the US. And just out of the blue, kind of Marshall emailed us and said, you know, hey, I've been thinking about this footage for a long time. You know, parts of it are on YouTube, parts of it have been in different films, but no one's ever kind of crafted it together. And I don't think this is an event that many people know about. And we kind of looked at it, and it's so funny because, you know, we always to try and give filmmakers this clarity I talked about in the beginning, we try and say almost like what we don't do as much as what we do. And we had said we don't make historic films, and then this one came through and we were like, well, we have to do this film because it's, you know, in the way we're talking about the news cycle, it really fit into this. You know, I think a lot of times maybe in America there was this view that, like, you know, fascism hadn't been there, or, you know, and actually you see this like massive Nazi rally in Madison Square Garden, and it's really jolting of like, you know, how close things always are, right? So we really felt that that did fit how we talk about stuff. You know, like if we're talking about the rise of the far right in the US, actually we can hark back to this like moment in the 30s that maybe people didn't know about and how close it came then. So it just felt perfect in that way. So, you know, we always work with people to help kind of craft their films, but that was a pretty quick turnaround because it is archive. Yeah, and we just, again, that was one we did with The Atlantic as well, and that just, it kind of just exploded around the internet.
Yeah. Next, the following year, you got another Oscar nomination for, I must admit, some friends of mine, Sung Young, and I remember going out to do the Oscar campaign for Scenes from a Dry City, and everyone saying, "Oh, you must be so excited," and I went, "No, there's this giant South Korean film in front of us, and we are not going to get past this film."
야, 미쳤나봐. 이런 상황에서 막 그러지 않냐? 안전하니까 가만히 있으라고. 그런 거 지네끼리 다 지네끼리 나오고 영국 왜 다 그러잖아. 그 지하철도 그렇잖아. 안전하니까 좀만 있어달라고 했는데 지하철 있었는데. 우리 진짜로 이만큼 비운 거야. 진짜야 이거. 다른 사람들을 살고 이만큼 미리.
There's not many people that would commission a film about a Korean ferry disaster several years after the fact. How did you jump into that? Why did you decide that this was for you?
I mean, this is a really good example because in the beginning we would commission. So rather than filmmakers necessarily coming to us, we would go out to filmmakers with an idea. And we've evolved over time because I really love dealing with like submissions that come to us. So I would say like we're kind of 50-50 when people bring in projects versus us generating them. And that was one where a member of our team had seen the candlelight vigils in South Korea after, you know, and around the time that their president had been ousted. And said like, this is really interesting, you know, like these are mass vigils and this is a big deal of what's going on here. And they've managed to get their president out of power and it's not really being talked about. So we kind of had a conversation about, well, who would be good to talk to about this? And I had shown Sung Jin's film Planet of Snail at Hot Docs and was so, I mean, God, that film, if you haven't seen it, like, oh, that film is stunning. So I was like, I would love to see what Sung Jin thinks of this. So we reached out to him. And this is like a perfect example of kind of how we work with filmmakers. And Sung Jin and his producer, Gary, said, yeah, we don't want to tell that story. They were like, we want to tell the story of the reason why this all happened. And we don't feel like it's really been told in its entirety before. I mean, everyone in Korea kind of knows the news cycle of it all, but no one has actually, and now like the court cases are over, there was footage that came through those court cases that we would like to build the whole kind of profile of how this came to be. And it's not really what's being reported. Because at that time, there was all these kind of weird tabloid stories about the former president and how she had this guru or like, you know, spiritual advice. And that was what everyone was focusing on rather than what led up to that happening. So they wanted to tell the story of the ferry disaster. And they wanted to really tell it from the perspective of all these different kind of responders to it. And, you know, when they found the audio that was kind of a direct link to the government from like the helicopters and the rest, it was unbelievable. And that film took over a year to make. I mean, that took a long time to get that film right. And for us, like that is that's when like the system of how we works perfectly, right? You know, we won't necessarily have the right, you know, who are we as a team, you know, sitting in New York to determine how a film should be told about South Korea, you know, like who are we to know that? So we always try and go to filmmakers who know what they're talking about and say, like, okay, we're interested in this subject, how would you tell this story? And that was an example of, you know, a filmmaker really knowing how to tell that story in like an incredible way. So,
Another film a filmmaker that I think you made 2 films with now, Garrett Bradley. I saw some stuff she did for New York Times, but then I remember watching The Earth is Humming, and I just smiled all the way through that film. Visually brilliant, humorous.
震度7を体験していただきました。地震はいつ起こるか分かりませんので、普段からの、訓練が大切です。今日は私が地震だというふうにお伝えしましたが、本当に地震が起こった時には、伝えてくれる人はいません。
She's obviously someone you're interested in, and also perhaps talk a little bit about America, because I must admit I watched that film and I wasn't sure if it was a documentary. Yeah. we traveled to New York, from New York to Los Angeles, the group of filmmakers from Field of Vision, and we argued about America on the plane journey for the whole time. So,
you know, Garrett became one of our fellows because we really just wanted to support what she was doing and how she was evolving her career. And America is kind of a perfect example of that, because at some point, I think Garrett stopped trying to chase what funders wanted and just decided to make what she wanted to make. And America is really an amazing example of that, and lots of people don't think it's a documentary, and I always landed, and this came through Hot Docs, of like how I determine documentary on 2 counts. So one, does the filmmaker think it's a documentary? And that's usually like my first thing. And the second is like, is it a current affairs documentary by which any level of like crafting is disingenuous in terms of telling like a really important story about the world? And that's kind of where I land on how I see what is a documentary and what isn't. And Garrett really feels America is a documentary, and you know, it's amazing kind of talking about it because it's filmed with actors and it's entirely constructed. But the reason is that the idea behind America is that it's an imagining of the history of Black America told through archive that doesn't exist. Essentially, you know, she is trying to recreate imagery that was never collected because people didn't think it should be, because it was about Black people. And so it's a series of reimaginings of like joy and love and triumph of the history of Black America. And so in an ideal world, this film would be a documentary because you'd be able to get the archive and you'd make an archive film. But because the archive doesn't exist, it's created archive. And so in her, like to her, and actually I feel that way too, you can count as a documentary because it should be. And it's actually on us that it isn't one. You know, so I kind of love that about the film, and it's such a beautiful film. I mean, it really is. So I can't we're going to put that out hopefully soonish. I can't wait for people to see it.
Another young filmmaker you've been working with, Charlie Lynn, who's got a very good following in the UK. I think he's really young as well. I think he's 22 or 23.
A little bit older than that, but not by much.
Is he older? Good, because I actually felt jealous, I think, when I read his age.
Everybody does.
Lasting Marks, a film made on an A4 piece of paper. Extremely creative. How did he pitch that to you, and why did you think, yes, please, this is for us?
The tabloids revelled in it. Absolutely loved it. Anyway, it was all too much for me. I was actually under some psychiatrists. I'm not quite sure why. I think it was the feeling of persecution by the system.
I mean, it's so interesting. We're actually going to put a piece up about like how that film came to be, because it's such an interesting story. Because Charlie is one of the most like meticulous, almost pedantic people I've ever met in my life. And he was really fascinated about this story in the UK, whereby there had been this series of kind of BDSM tapes going around, and the police at the time thought they'd stumbled upon some sort of snuff tapes and this like terrible ring of, you know, and wasn't true. And it became this kind of weird manhunt in which, and it's one of the only, it's a kind of landmark legal case in the UK where in the court case, the perpetrator was also the victim. And so it was like a really interesting court case, and it's kind of studied in law schools here. And as Charlie was researching it and got really fascinated, he realized so much of the detail of, say, like the Wikipedia page of what was online was wrong. So Charlie went down this like road, as he does, of like how to change the Wikipedia page, and it ended up being like this huge investigation on his part. He found out all this different information and made this film where he really wanted to show it's done entirely through documentation, right? So the film is essentially the size of a piece of paper, the dimensions of a piece of paper, and is told through kind of the press clippings and documentation of the case, while you have somebody who was kind of involved in it and certainly a victim of it explaining what happened. And for us, I mean, this was just like a slam dunk, you know, like it's this idea of like looking at something from a perspective you've never seen. And also Charlie was really, really adamant that we were not going to put it out with kind of masking to make it 16:9. Like it was going to go out in that, and we love a challenge like that. We were like, okay, this is going to make our lives slightly harder, but like and actually Charlie's right. I mean, like, I was joking with him the other day of like, when you think about something like Quibi, which is this like billion-dollar company, which is all about like phone ratio, Charlie was like making a film that was essentially phone ratio, and how lots of people watch work. And he is a real genius, and like everyone who encounters Charlie, especially if you're a filmmaker, gets really jealous because he is a genius. But I mean, I think for us, somebody who's trying to explore just how you even show a film in a different way is really interesting to us. So, you know, I can imagine we're going to keep working with Charlie for a while.
The film that, when I was going through your catalogue before we made Scenes from a Dry City, I was trying to find a connection to a film that I would have loved to have made. I always think that's kind of interesting, not when you go, that's amazing, but when you go, shit, I wish I'd made that film. And the film that you'd made called Monumento struck an enormous sort of pang of desire in me, and thinking this is incredible. The pacing of it, the cinematography in it, and I just loved it.
Right, it's like the pacing of that film is kind of what makes it so beautiful. It's a calm film, and I think often there's something to be really said, and it's something I talk to filmmakers a lot about when we give notes, is like creating pauses for audiences, right? Of like giving them time to process is really important, because a lot of the time, especially with shorts, you're trying to get so much information out in a very short amount of time. And in many ways, shorts are harder to make than features because of the duration. You know, you're trying to get so much into such a short amount of time. but having those moments where a filmmaker can, like an audience member can take a breath or process is really important. And I think Scenes from Dry City does that perfectly, because you have a lot going on in that film. Like, you really do, and you don't feel that way afterwards. You don't think, God, I need to sit down and like, you actually give them the space. And I think Monumento does that perfectly, because it really is like, it feels like a simple film, but it isn't a simple film. It's actually very complex, but because of the pacing and because of those moments of space, it kind of doesn't overwhelm you by what it's trying to do. And I think you're right. It's a really key part of making a short, is like trying to have that balance between getting everything you want across, but also letting an audience come with you. Because if you overwhelm them, they're going to need to, if you've been at screenings, you often find that if an audience, when you're moderating a Q&A, has no questions, it's because they're still processing. And that's okay sometimes. Sometimes you need to do that. But at other times, like, it's nice to do it in the film. And I think that is a really perfect example of like letting an audience come with you along the story, and like being respectful of how they're going to have to take in all this information.
And from your perspective, other key sort of moments, chapters with field of vision shorts, when do you think people really start to take notice of you guys and think, oh, this is really, really interesting what's happening here?
I mean, I do think Best of Luck was a turning point with a public audience, for sure. But that doesn't necessarily always translate. There are some films that like you don't know. I mean, we don't have like the millions of views or the viralness of it all is not something I really ever think about, to be honest. Like, it's not something I'm going for. I think when you try chasing viral videos, it's just, you end up with the worst films. So I don't have a measure of success in terms of like numbers of viewership. I think it's kind of how the film sits in. And one of the films I always think about is Graven Image by Sierra Pettengill. And this is, an incredible film that looks at this kind of Confederate monument in the US and how it kind of, the building of it connects with the KKK. And it's such a great use of archive.
In Dixieland, where I was born, early on one frosty morn, look away, look away, look away.
There's this, unbelievable kind of memorial in Alabama in the US, which looks at kind of the history of slavery and the impact. And when they asked if they could put that in the permanent collection, I was like, that for me is wow, okay. Like, we got that one right. And so it's kind of, when I measure like what we would deem success, it's things like that, like the fact that this short that we made that, was kind of a smaller budget archive-based short is going to be in something, it's going to be on permanent view in something that important. To me, that's a win. So I think Graven Image is certainly a big deal film for me. It's so hard to choose any of them, but I'm trying to think if there are like ones that really, I mean, to be honest, I do love them all. Yeah, I do. I mean, we wouldn't have done them if we didn't love them all. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what other ones. I don't know. I mean, when we did this like series with Firelight Media, who we love, where we really thought like post-Trump election, like what could we do here? And what we decided to do is partner with them, and we called it our 100 Days. And it was this idea of like every film was made by a filmmaker of color, of them exploring how they thought they would be affected by the election. And that felt really meaningful to me. That was one that, and then we're also working on a film about the Hong Kong protests right now that I really, really care about. So yeah, there's so many.
Getting near the end, so I will. Professor Liani Mastorp said she would like to ask you about the influence of COVID and the Black Lives Movement on documentaries now. She says, do you think we'll see more COVID isolation, introspective, auto-ethnographic films, or will we have escapist will escapist documentaries be favoured? And are funders, broadcasters currently seeing more films and by and about BitDoc?
That is a great question. So the answer on the first one around COVID films is yes. So we have, I think at the last count, we've been pitched 45 COVID shorts. So that doesn't even like count the features. And I don't mind that, because also, like, on a number of levels. One, because we need independent perspective on this. We have to. We can't have like the history of this being told only through like broadcast news. And so we absolutely need independent filmmakers to interrogate what's going on. That being said, like, you know, we've actually been thinking for the last 5 months, like, what is Field of Vision's COVID film? Because, you know, in the beginning we were trying to make these reactive shorts, and on this one I was kind of like, we're still in it though. Like, what is, like, and also the approach. So we hadn't had that many where I felt like really the approach was like how we would come at it. And we actually have 2 potential shorts right now that like are going to be like nothing else around COVID. And I think there also is, in the same way, we struggle with election-based films for the same reason of, a lot of the time it takes longer to do it well. It takes longer to do it. So usually the election is done by the time the film's finished. And then at that point, people don't want to watch films about the election they just went through. And we've really found that. And I'm kind of curious as to how that's going to land with COVID. We need those films for, say, like 20, 30 years time. But am I watching out in my own time films about COVID? No, I'm not. So I'm just like, I'm curious as to, again, it would have to grab me. It would have to be something I hadn't seen before, because we're all living it. You know, we're all living it. So I would say to filmmakers who want, and also, you know, the one bit I will say is, like, I totally understand filmmakers pitching right now because everyone needs income. So like, I in no way begrudge filmmakers pitching. And I do think we're starting now over time to find films that are in our wheelhouse. So I'm kind of excited about that. But, you know, like, for example, I know most of the other platforms have been putting out tons of COVID films. So, you know, there is a place for them for sure. And then in terms of, you know, working with people of color, I mean, we have had this in our mandate since day one. And it's actually been really interesting because I think currently we're about like 43% of our filmmakers are filmmakers of color. Like through the history of Field of Vision. And so we're looking at different ways of like, how can we improve that too? And like, which bits haven't we been paying enough attention to? And I do think we're in a place of change, and it's a shame that it didn't come before. And it's a shame that it's kind of taken this to do it. And actually, you know, I'm hearing from other like film colleagues have been like, now we have to do it because otherwise this will hurt our business. And I'm like, well, great. It's a shame it took this to get there, but like, I do actually think like a line has been drawn now of like, it can't be how it was before. You know, we're not going backwards now. So I do feel very open. So I'm very excited about how things are moving on that way. So, yeah.
We're getting close to the end, but you did just mention something quite interesting. You said you didn't like the approach that people, what is the Field of Vision approach? I mean, people will be desperate for tidbits, like how do we get Charlotte's attention? So what do they do to make you think, oh, I might, you know, interview this guy or give him a phone call or this person and see?
I mean, I think it's that thing of like not trying to do something people haven't seen before, which I know is like a huge challenge, right? But I think it's just, you know, we do have films that have talking heads. We do have films that kind of go in traditional structures, but it's the way that they're told, I suppose. So say, you know, you think like, I'm a filmmaker and I'm at home, I'm in quarantine, or I can't, you know, for whatever reason, go out into the field for safety reasons, is to really think about that, right? Is to think about it beyond just, I'm going to record Zoom calls. I mean, you can do that too, but think of a creative way that hasn't been shown, or go just like that step beyond what that means. You know, we were talking to a filmmaker the other day who we're working with, who has been doing it. It's essentially like a video call based thing. It's not specifically COVID based, but we kind of said to him, but like, we can't see you're putting us in the viewer's perspective. Like, think about the viewer and what that means coming into it. So for us, it's always like, yes, you have this idea, and then now push it a little bit forward. Like, think about it in just like a slightly different way. Because there are, you know, and we do need all the different types of films. Like, people should make what they want. It just, you know, whether it's for us or not is irrelevant in many ways. It's like, if they definitely want to pitch us, then that's a consideration. But we are going to need all sorts of different types of films in the future to tell this story of what we're all going through. So for us, it needs to be something unusual. I mean, I was talking to a filmmaker over the weekend, and we've started kind of putting in our submission, like, why do you think this is Field of Vision? Because it really gives you a sense of where the filmmaker's coming from. And his response was just like, it's a contemporary story that's a bit left field. And I was like, well, that's kind of perfect. Like, that is, I mean, like, if you're ever going to sum it up, that's very true. Like,
okay, final question. You have to tell us what's coming. You know, what we're looking for content. What are you going to bring to us in the next 6 months, 12 months? What should we be excited about?
Well, we have a big feature coming out soonish. I mean, certainly playing festivals called MLK FBI. That goes into kind of the history of how the FBI really, really kind of went for Martin Luther King. And that's a stunning film. It's entirely archive, of course, and but it just really, and right now thinking about like police overreach and protest and uprisings and civil rights, it's a really, you know, we didn't plan any of that because it's been being made for so long, but it kind of couldn't be a more timely thing to look back while looking what we're doing now. And then, you know, Garrett Bradley's film America is coming out soonish. And then we also did just put a film up, if people haven't watched it, which is about accessibility on public transport, which I really love this film. It's told in such a beautiful way. So that's a really good one. I don't think what else we have. God, we have so many films coming up. I mean, the Hong Kong film will be coming out soon. That's an incredible film. Yeah, we've got a lot coming up.
Is there anything that I forgot to ask you?
I don't know. I don't think so.
I didn't want to look. I didn't want to look stupid.
You didn't look stupid at all. Good question. Good question. Yeah.
Charlotte Cook, thank you so much for your time. It will be warmly received in Cape Town and Johannesburg. And I hope you get lots of clever filmmakers from South Africa sending you ideas.
Well, I mean, that was one of the lovely things about Scenes from Dry City. I feel like the moment people knew we'd funded it, so many South African filmmakers started contacting us, and that for me is perfect. You know, I want people to know that we are very international, and so I think we've certainly got 2 South African films we funded, so I would love more.
Okay, cool. Thank you for your time. Have a wonderful afternoon.
You too.